So I'm going to start this off. Shelterbox got started by one fellow who had a compassion to help those after disaster. He was a Rotarian in a small Rotary club in Helston, England, and for his millennial project, he talked his club into preparing boxes to deliver to people in disaster. So that was 2000. About 2004, they started with international, what they call affiliates, and Canada was quick to sign on. Ron and I first heard about Shelterbox. It was interesting. It was at an international convention. These international conventions are amazing. And at this convention in Copenhagen, Gordon and Deb were there as well. And we ended up meeting up and they were saying, oh, did you see that Shelterbox thing? And we hadn't. So we went in and saw it. Fast forward a year later, 2007, Ron and I were at Salt Lake City at the Rotary International Convention. And just about that time, we were both retiring. And we were looking for some way to give back. And we went to, it was a great display that Shelterbox had there. The next thing we knew, we were signed up and on we went. Shelterbox is an international disaster relief organization that specializes in emergency shelter and disaster relief. When there's a disaster, it's important to have a focus, and Shelterbox chose shelter, and that is our specialty. We are Rotary International's only official project partner in disaster relief, and Rotary is very careful when it accepts a project partner.
Just hit the arrow here.
Why do we exist? We exist because, now get your head around this statistic, 114 million people are displaced. It's a staggering number, which only continues to grow day by day. Our mission is to create a world where no one is left without shelter after disasters. We believe that shelter is a human right and that all should have access to it. When you've lost everything in a disaster, it's really hard to start your life over. But if you have some form of shelter where you can prepare your food, your children can eat, it can quickly become its home. And it's interesting, I look at this picture, and when I was in Malawi, it was the first time in my district, my opportunities as a response team member to deliver shelter kits, which were the first step. We moved away from the box. And it was really interesting to note that when we noticed that those who had been displaced by the disaster, the recovery was a lot quicker. When they actively were able to build their own shelter, their recovery, they were already moving towards recovery. When we presented them with a tent and all the equipment that they had an instant shelter, but it kind of stalled their recovery. There was, a huge gasp. Now we're safe, but their recovery was slower. So it was quite interesting the difference that asking the people what they needed, and then they could build a structure that was culturally appropriate to them. Our tents aren't culturally appropriate to many different countries. When you're safe with somewhere to cook, sleep, and with your family, you can think about your road to recovery. So this was the very first deployment we went to. I went to, sorry, Ron had already been to Bangladesh. This was after the China earthquake in 2008. And it was quite interesting because China does not invite outside countries to come in. We felt that the reason that they did this year was it was the year that they were hosting the Olympics, and they wanted to show the world that they were open, their doors were open. It was a huge impact, this earthquake. It happened in a very remote part of the country where there were all these little villages up in the mountains. And it's interesting, in an earthquake, I didn't realize this, but the mountains shake more than on the flats. So these mountainous villages were very badly damaged. So we were sent, and the other reason I think China invited us to come was our tents were made in China. Is it 80% of the tents in all the world are made in China. So our Shelterbox tents were made there. So it was a quick shipment from their factory, and we had 750 tents to distribute. So we were a team of 4, and Ron and I had 500. I don't know how we ended up with 500. They got 250, but anyway, we had 500 tents. And so what we did was we broke it into, we asked the locals where the biggest need was, and then we set about going. And what we would do is we would arrange to have the delivery of the tents the same day as we were going to arrive, and we wouldn't distribute them until we'd given the instructions of how to set up the tent, because our dome tent was very foreign to them. They all had square tents, and so it has to be set up correctly. So we would do a demonstration, and then we would move on to the next community. And then we would stop back at the first community to see how it had gone, to see if they'd had any problems setting it up or whatever. So this was at the end of a day. We were driving through this little village, and I saw this tent in the front yard. And I said, oh guys, there's one of our tents. And so we stopped the truck. We were already half a block down from where this tent was set up. And we started walking back. And this sweet lady, she saw the insignia on my shirt, and she recognized it with she connected the dots. Like we were connected to who had delivered this tent. And she came up to me and she just gave me this huge bear hug. Well, Ron had said to me, Claire, I'd really like to get a picture of her and her family with the tent. Well, I was like a block away from the tent. So she and I did this lovely dance all down the street, because our interpreter wasn't with us at the time either. And of course, I don't speak Chinese. So we were doing this lovely dance while she was giggling away, and she just wouldn't let go of me. Anyway, so it was so sweet. And her 12-year-old, she was a single mom, her 12-year-old had set up that tent by himself. And she was so proud of the fact that he'd listened to all our instructions, and she was just really proud, and he'd done a really good job.
It just shows what a simple tent meant to people that have lost so much.
And I'll turn it over to Ron.
Okay.
I'll switch seats.
I wonder if would you folks mind if we sat for this so I can see this thing a little bit better? The old eyes are going. Okay, so this was the Japanese tsunami that was very disastrous. Obviously, it was a massive disaster in 2011, and one of the reasons I put this in is Japan is a first world country, a relatively wealthy country. Why would they need outside aid? Not very often we do go to first world countries, but we do, and this is an example. They just couldn't handle it. Where I remember, we went to there was a big auditorium where a lot of people were staying, where they'd sent up mattresses and sleeping bags and blankets. But outside this, we went there to see how they were making out. There was all sorts of cars, and there were people living in the cars. We spoke to them, and they said, yeah, they won't have room for us. We went inside, and they certainly didn't. So these people in cars were sleeping in cars. So
if I could just interject, the other thing about the cars were they didn't allow, those of us who are pet lovers, they didn't allow pets. So anybody who had a pet was staying in their car so that they could also have their pets. Sorry.
No, but that's just an indication of how they needed this aid. So they were thrilled to get shelter boxes and tents. This just is an example of what Shelter Box has done since we started in 2000. We've responded to over 300 disasters, worked in over 100 countries, and we've reached about 2.5 million people in that period. And Shelter Box has been nominated a couple of times for the Nobel Peace Prize, so there's recognition of what Shelter Box is doing. And also, we've been recognized by the United Nations as the most effective NGO specializing in emergency shelter. Positive things about what recognition for what we're doing. Now this one we put this one in about procurement. I wanted to kind of explain what we're doing. Originally we started off, and most of the materials were obtained in England. But we've now been getting materials from different locations. And often what we do is we get them in areas where we're going to deploy so that we can get the materials much faster and also much cheaper. It's cheaper to get them. We don't have to ship. We're getting material. You'll see a little further along. We're getting materials in the local area, and it also is environmentally friendly. We're less shipping as we're picking them up, and it also it supports. We're able to get. We got more sophisticated. We get appropriate aid for the country and what the culture and what the people want, and it helps the local economy as well. Okay, Claire, back to you.
Okay, so this is kind of accentuates how every community is different. This was our early in I think this was 2010. We went to the Philippines, and Ron was the first team in, I was the second team in. It was a huge storm that had hit. They get battered all the time, but we were up in towards a mountainous area where it was landslides, and they explained how just the whole side of the mountain collapsed, and they just had nothing left. And so it was like a little town that they set up here with all the tents. But what I wanted you to notice is how they've set up little stores, and they had that kind of along. And they're on their way to the recovery. But they were so thankful. They couldn't say enough to appreciate the difference that we'd made. And it was very sweet. We were adding on to one of these camps, and we were just waiting to do the demonstration about how to set up the tents and such. And so I was kind of wandering amongst they had like kind of little streets. They even had their names on the tents, like their addresses. And so I asked this one older lady, and I said, and how is the tent working out for you and your family? And she said, oh, I lost my whole family. I lost my husband and all my children. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And she said, it's okay. I'm living with my sister and her family. And she said, I love the fact that I have my own little room. Well, one of the things our tents has is they call them privacy curtains. And I always thought when we first got these tents, what a silly thing, really a privacy curtain, after disaster. But this absolutely, to me, brought whole new meaning to that privacy tent when this woman explained how much it meant to her. Because every community is different, we make sure that they receive only what they need to recover, not items that they do not need. We now try to deliver aid in our iconic shelter boxes, not only in our shelter boxes, but use alternate pack that is easier to carry, store, and recycle. We're doing a lot on pallets. It's just easier to deliver, etc. We learn from every community we serve and are committed to constantly improving our aid. So am I going on?
I can do this. So basically the supplies, and those of you that have been around here, you've seen this, but this is the basic supply kit with the tent in the big bag and tools to help them, start to rebuild. The shelter, the tent was the traditional original. And it's still being very much used. There's areas where it's really needed, but we started to move on to shelter kits, and that's what you see on the right. And we've seen all sorts of ways that people can make shelters, and the dollar goes along a lot further. They aren't nearly as expensive. And here's an example, the shelter kit. Here's an example of a picture of what was built. And there's two big tarps in it, and that's all that you're looking at there, plus some local lumber or local tree good sized branches could be used. And people can be very, very creative, we're finding shelter kits very effective and using them a lot more now as we specialize to needs. And just here's some different examples of how the shelter kits and some specific tents are used. If you look at the top left, and I'll just briefly explain, you go across the top left to the top right, and then from the bottom left across. That first one is Ukraine, and those are roof tarps. They were able to have enough materials to make some. Where homes have been damaged, they had enough materials to put the walls up, but they used the tarps for the roof. The next one is in the Philippines, And that's what I had just shown you before. They can build a complete shelter out of a shelter kit using frames. In Greece, this is number 3, the top on the right, is these big tents are in Greece. And again, this shows the variety, what happened, what these were about. This was part of the huge migration that you read about, and we've seen coming across people from North Africa into Greece, and just nowhere for them to stay. They were basically homeless. So that it was more effective. There were so many people, and we didn't have individual tents for enough. I mean, we never have enough when we're on deployment. When these big tents were used.
Can I just interject another point about in big disasters like the UNHCR, which is kind of the lead international charity, they ask that we standardize everything, because if one family had a shelter box tent, one had a square tent, and one had a little teepee tent, it wouldn't be fair. And so they standardize them, and these are the UNHCR tents.
You have to be very careful. I remember in Haiti, a massive disaster. There were communities in Port-au-Prince that were set up all around with anything makeshift, terrible little shelters. So we would bring tents, but we always went in first and found out how many families needed tents. If we needed 25 tents and we only had 20 at that time, we didn't go in until we had 25, because it's very difficult when people are in so much desperate need. There can be violence. So bottom left, Cameroon. This is roofing material. They had bricks to make up the shelters out of bricks, or these small room houses, but they had they couldn't afford roofing material. Well, we purchased material in Cameroon, basically aluminum roofing for them, and that's what we do. Again, we're more flexible now, where we can source locally and supply what's needed. The next one on the bottom, middle and the bottom right, is called a Bahama shelter, and I'm not exactly sure what that means, but it was available in Nigeria and a big need, and so we were able to get them in Nigeria. And the last one on the bottom right is called an iron net shelter, is what we called it, and this is Yemen. We found in Yemen it was such a harsh climate that the tents they had to be replaced. So we started concentrating on getting something local, and we provided, these are basically aluminum shelters. Okay, here's kind of a sad one. These are the number of current deployments that Shelterbox is involved with. There's 11 here if you look through them around the world. But what's particularly disturbing is, of the 11, you'll see that 8 are in conflict zones. And that's where we're ending up doing more and more work now. Very difficult, very challenging, and we generally work with a trusted partner on the ground, because we do sometimes send our people in, but we're establishing contacts with, and we're very careful with who the partners are. But those are the current deployments for Shelterbox. And just to highlight a couple of them, we're just getting into Gaza, obviously very, very difficult. There's about 1.9 million people that are in need. And what we've started to do, we're making arrangements. We're working with an organization, the acronym is MAP, and it stands for Medical Assistance to Palestinians. And this is an organization in Palestine that's been working there for 37 years. We've checked them out very carefully. They are a trusted organization. So that's how we're getting supplies in, and we're bringing in, blankets, mattresses, kitchen sets, hygiene kits, and these are for people that, of course, lost their homes completely, or they've been terribly damaged. And we're working, the other connection, we've got a Rotary connection in there. We're working with district, it's 2452. Of course, I had to look up that. And this encompasses about 9 countries, and Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine is recognized in that group. And we're coordinating with them, and also we're working with connections in Egypt to try and get this aid in. As an organization, Shelterbox is very, very careful to be neutral and apolitical, obviously, in a very difficult situation like that. And basically what we do is we go to where the highest need is and work with them. And the Ukraine crisis. We went in very shortly after the war started, another difficult one, and we work with partners. We have some of our own people who've gotten in there. Let's see, what have I got? You can read it there. 1.7 million Ukrainians in need. And things like, lots of mattresses, people living in collective shelters, schools, churches, and so on, that we've been supplying thermal blankets and clothing, emergency repair kits, again, for people that need to repair their home.
One of the other things I like that they brought in were wood stoves and wood and our solar lights, because so many of the cities they lost all their power, right? And their climate is pretty inclement. Their winters are very cold. So by delivering wood and a wood, a fire source, it was very helpful for them. So that was a drive last year.
And we've helped, as you can see at the bottom, since the conflict started, approximately 110,000 people, displaced people.
Is anybody having trouble hearing us? Oh, okay.
Good.
What's that?
Pardon me. Rotary is a big part of Shelter Box, as Claire mentioned. A Rotarian founded it. This is up there, Valerie. This is from John Huco, the General Secretary and CEO of Rotary International. He's talking about obviously our project partnership. Through this project partnership, Rotary members around the globe can collaborate with Shelter Box to support communities in desperate need of emergency temporary shelter and vital supplies following natural disasters. And John Huco is a big supporter of Shelter Box, and it's a good partnership that works very well. About 40% of our funds come from Rotarians, and you folks in this club has been tremendous, and this district. This is just an indication of our Rotary involvement. On our deployments, we're generally involved with Rotarians, working with them. They're helping us. This was when I was in Bangladesh and at the Rotary Club of Dhaka, and that fella to my right was a Rotarian and was just tremendously helpful with it, that I worked with while I was there. You want to talk about a Shelter Box hero?
So in Canada, we recognize Shelter Box heroes, and these are clubs who donate. $1,200 is what used to be the kind of the cost of the general shelter and the Shelter Box with all its, and $3,600 is what's required for silver, and $6,000 is for gold. And our Rotary Club was the only club in the district last year who got gold, so we can be extremely proud of our club at least we are extremely proud of our club for all the support that they've given us over the years. And it was one of the things I didn't mention in our intro was we had a very rocky time in 2010 when we were changing over our Shelter Box, and Ron and one other fellow were absolutely instrumental in saving Shelter Box and reestablishing Shelter Box Canada, and revitalizing, making sure that everything was done correctly, met all the guidelines of our charity laws within Canada, and we have a very strong Shelter Box organization as a result of that changeover in 2010.
Okay. Well, this is just just as we wind up here, this was Turkey 2011, a picture I took that you can see the snow and the kind of weather they're dealing with. This was a family, you have to look closely to count them, but there's 10 people, and they had 10 people living in the tent itself. Cozy, but you can get that many people into a tent, and we had to do that because there were so many people and we only had so many tents.
And that was one of the one of the times they really need the tents are after an earthquake, because they very often they can't live in their structure because it's structurally damaged and they're afraid of it falling down. They can repair it, but they need another source. And it was quite, Ron told me the story, when they set this up, the government also set up electricity for them, and they had one bulb in each tent, and they had their Turkish mats, and you were saying it was like, was plus 10 or 12 inside that tent before they went into them. So you think like a tent in snow is not ideal, but with those two things and the fact that the other thing that's interesting about these tents is there's a liner that goes in. It's kind of like a silver liner, like it's like a foil wrap, but it also acts as a heat shield. It acts in the hot climates. It acts as an air shield, an air passes the air passes over and cools the tent, but here it acted to keep the tents even warmer.
I worked with the U.S. 82nd Airborne in Haiti, and one of the generals, or one of one of the senior commanders, looked at our tents and he said, "These are the best tents I've ever seen." And he had lots of experience. They're a very durable, well-built tent. Okay, that's pretty much our wrap-up, our shelter box and what's going on in the shelter box. Any questions?
I did bring this. This isn't actually a shelter box solar light, but this is a wonderful piece of our equipment, and it means so much for families. When we were in Malawi, I think it was it's kind of interesting, it was two women who developed these, they're called Luminades, are the ones that we use for shelter box. And somebody walked off with ours at the last convention anyway. But it's kind of this idea where it hangs. But in countries where there's no, at night in Malawi, going out to the washroom, there's all kinds of venomous snakes. And these were just unbelievably popular as they were in Bangladesh. We assisted with Rohingya refugees, and they were so damaged by the trauma that they'd been through. It was immeasurable. The confidence it gave those. They were mostly women in those tents, in that refugee camp, to be able to have these to go to the washroom or just to venture out at night. It's a simple thing. And when I was in Malawi, it was so sweet. They would hang them in the cornfields during the day so you look at these cornfields and you think, what's that kind of bizarre looking thing? But they're a lot bigger. Ours are bigger, and now they're even more sophisticated, where you can actually charge your computer or your phone with them. So they have a cell charger as well.
So any questions from anyone?
I was wondering,
Sure.
About what happens to your big equipment that they don't need when they're finished?
Well, that's good. That's a good question. Everything is left there, and people wonder, what about these tents? And they, what they do is we gift them to the people, and sometimes what they'll do when they're finished with them, they'll pass them on, or they keep them for another disaster if it lasts that long. But the equipment is gifted to them. We didn't feel it was right to expect them to be given back.
And it's interesting, when we were in Malawi, we learned that actually they didn't like our cooking. They didn't like our cooking pot set. It wasn't culturally appropriate for them, and we saw those for sale at the market. And some of us were kind of saying, But when we asked them what they needed, they said food. Well, we only provide shelter, but by selling their cook set, they could get money for food. So we understand it, and now we wouldn't obviously send them to that area again, because it's just not culturally appropriate. But that's the type of thing that happens. And
as we mentioned, we got more sophisticated. We go in and find out exactly what they need and give them specifically that, not a full box. As when we first started out, that's what we were doing. But so we're very careful about what they get.